Welcome, everybody. We are just waiting on our last panelists, and then we will go ahead and get started here. All right, Ryan, we ready to get started?
Figured let's give it one more minute for anybody else who wanted to jump in, and then we'll get started at about 12:03.
All right, I've got 12:03, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to What Just Happened, our recap of the 2021 legislative session. My name is Brett D'Antonio. I'm the CEO of Habitat for Humanity, Seattle, King County. We provide permanently affordable home ownership opportunities and home repair services to low-income families in both King and Kittitas counties. As everybody likely knows, this year in Olympia was a little different. Of course, in this context, more of a virtual place than a physical one, but we still saw major pieces of legislation cross the finish line, from COVID relief, criminal justice reform, tenant protection, and so much more. And many of these things would not have gone through if not for the two lawmakers that we have here today, who I have the great pleasure to introduce, State Senator Mona Das and State Representative Jamila Taylor. State Senator Das represents the 47th District, which covers Kent, Auburn, Covington, and some of the surrounding area. This is her third year in the state Senate and is currently the vice chair of the Senate's Housing and Local Government Committee. Thank you for joining us, Senator.
My pleasure. So wonderful to see everybody. Hi, Jamila.
Hi, I'm
Right.
so glad to be here too.
And we also have State Representative Taylor with us today. Representative Taylor represents the 30th Legislative District, covering Federal Way and other parts of South King County. This was her first year in the legislature and has already made a name for herself. She's the vice chair of the House's Committee on Housing, Human Services, and Veterans, as well as the chair of the Washington State Legislature's Black Members Caucus. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative. And I'm now going to hand things off to our moderator for our discussion today, Ryan Donohue, who is the Advocacy and Policy Director for Habitat here in King County. Take it away, Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brett. And thank you to both of our amazing legislators that are here today. This is going to be a fun conversation, and I want to also encourage everyone in the audience to get in on the action. We're going to be asking a lot of questions and having some good conversation, but it's important that everybody else chime in. So please don't hesitate to include questions that you may have as we're going along. Put them in the chat. And make sure that we continue to ask these questions and continue to have this conversation. As everyone here, I believe, knows, this is going to take work for, in order to make progress overall, we need to have as many people as possible involved in this conversation, and we need to be moving forward. And the only way that happens is thanks to you all and getting engaged. So please feel free to ask us questions. Feel free to include that in the chat, because otherwise it's going to just be really boring, just me asking questions over and over again. Before we get deep into this, I want to first take a moment, and because I believe it's incredibly important that we acknowledge that wherever we are today on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional homes of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Susquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. If you'd like to learn more about the original stewards of the land that we are all joining from today, I would highly encourage you to visit native-land.ca and learn more about where you are today. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get things started. Thank you so much, everyone, or thank you so much to you, Senator Das, and you, Representative Taylor, for joining us. So I guess we'll get started. Representative Taylor, let me get started with you. Just and a question for both of you really is the 2021 session. It happened. It's done. It was historic and interesting and unusual and different. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to defer to Senator Doss because she knows what it's like to legislate in real life. I know what it's like to sit in my mama's basement and legislate from the computer with a cat watching over me to make sure that I log in and take my computer off mute. But certainly, I want to defer to Senator Doss, and then I'll just chime in with like my little addition to it.
Thank you. It's so great to see you, Rep. Taylor. You know, I've known Rep. Taylor for years and was so honored to help her, you know, realize this amazing dream that she had. I'm so incredibly proud of the work she did. And Ryan, I just missed you at the Habitat event last weekend. So I'm sorry I came late because I had a few other events, like in-person events are happening, which is nice. And I just want to say, first of all, and I did get to see Jamila there, so we actually like had lunch and like in real life, it was kind of amazing. I just want to say that Habitat, I've been a partner with Habitat since my first session. Jason Gauthier and I passed a bill 5025, I believe it was, and then last year we passed another Habitat bill, and this year I partnered with Habitat and many organizations to pass MFTE, and we can get into what that is later, but I will tell you, it's the most unsexy bill, but of all I usually pass about 6 to 8 bills a year, and out of the bills that I passed, honestly, I think this is the one that's going to make the biggest difference. And I'm just really excited to talk about it. So we'll get there. So I'll talk a little bit about what the difference was like. So, you know, this was my third session. So I did 2 in person, a long session for 105 days. Then I got to do the short one, 60 days, which I prefer, by the way. I like things to go quick. So I like the 60 days. And then this time, luckily it was 105. Otherwise we wouldn't have been able to get all that we got done. There's positives and negatives. I'm an extrovert. I'm 100% extroverted. And so I actually turned someone into an introvert. It was kind of weird and glad to say I'm still an extrovert. But so that part was missing for me, and seeing people in little boxes was really hard. And it was the most open legislature we've ever had. You know, it's very hard for people to travel to Olympia to give a 1 minute or a 90-second testimony. And so I do believe that is a barrier, right? So for people who are disabled or people who are working, people who can't get off work to drive to Olympia. So that was incredible. I mean, to see people literally from around our state come and testify. Yes, it was more accessible, and people still had to wait for, you know, sometimes an hour or 2 to be able to testify. So that was incredible. I will say positives and negatives about not having lobbyists around all over the place. I didn't feel henpecked to death as a legislator. You just feel like pecked to death because you leave the bathroom, someone's waiting to talk to you. They want to walk you to your next meeting. You know, I mean, they just like have 24-hour access. And so if you talk to any lobbyist, I think they'll say it was the worst session ever because they had very little access to us. And honestly, yeah, there was a little bit of drawbacks, but one of the positives were we legislators got to make decisions based on talking to each other legislators, talking to our constituents, and not being hounded by lobbyists. And there are lobbyists that I work with, like Ryan and Jason, who I love and adore and have a lot of respect for them. And, you know, we see eye to eye on a lot of things, well, most everything, all things so far, nothing not yet. But there's lobbyists that I struggle with. And so that was one of the silver linings for me, is just being able to make decisions and not really be constantly pulled in like a lot of different directions. It was really hard on my staff. My LA was really, really hard on her because when they didn't have access to me, I think they had access to her. So those are some of the positives and negatives. I also loved being in my, yoga pants and slippers, not gonna lie. Business on top, yoga pants and slippers on the bottom. That was kind of awesome. And I had access, like whoever I wanted to talk to, I could just call, right? Or schedule a Zoom meeting. So for me, those were some of the positives. We passed incredible legislation, and we can all tell you that we weren't sure if we would pass any bills. And we passed quite a few and some historic changes. And I'm just going to say there's a trajectory of why we passed cap gains. There's a trajectory of why we passed the Climate Commitment Act. There's a trajectory of why I passed my styrofoam ban. And it just goes like this. Lisa Wellman flipped a seat. Manka Dinkra flipped a Senate. Claire, Emily, and Mona flipped seats. And then we got Tawana. And then we got to elect, many, many new Black legislators, which was just incredible. And so, they always say if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And people who look like me and Jamila have been on the menu for far too long. And when people like me and Jamila are sitting at the table, we're no longer on the menu. And so that is why, if you want to know why we passed all of these bills, I'm going to say you're looking at two of the reasons right here. So for anyone who did help, help make sure we were there, thank you. It has changed our state for the better, and our colleagues have embraced us and our ideas and our different lived experience. I'm still an apartment, like I'm one of 5 renters in the entire Senate. I'm the only person in the entire legislature. I'm five renters in the legislature, and I'm the only legislator that I know of that will admit that I've been through a foreclosure. So I know what it's like to have hardship. I also have been in the mortgage industry for 17 years. So I know a lot about home ownership. And so partnering with Habitat for Humanity has truly been a dream come true. And I love what y'all do, and I can't wait to see what's next for us.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Representative Taylor?
We'll just add that on the House side, it was a great experience to see how we worked as a team, and how we collaborated and how that would translate into the work with our peers on the other side of the chamber. And so, passing big legislation requires all hands on deck. And sometimes you don't know something is big until it's done. And so for me, I'm coming in like, oh, this is like normal, just cause eviction, like, working families tax exemption, passing a legislation that really helped people, everyday people, is essential. And it was the mission that I came to Olympia to do. And, the way we had leadership focus our energy, like, we had to prioritize bills that were in, 4 categories for us on the House side. Racial equity. So everything had to have a racial equity lens. What impact did it have on communities? Next is the COVID recovery, everything related to the public health response to ensuring that we had literally a healthy community. And then not just looking at COVID as it stands as in and of itself, there are impacts that are far reaching. So if you think about healthcare as the whole continuum, and COVID is one piece of it, we can be more resilient in case a pandemic happens in the future. Environmental justice is something that it was an incredible and important priority, and we know we're just scratching the surface on that work. And for me, as a person of color, as a Black woman in particular, had not been really well received in the environmental justice space. And so it felt like this is the beginning of how we do the intersectionality of climate justice and racial justice and social equity all in those conversations. And those are difficult conversations to have when you feel like we're peers on the same side of the aisle. And, you really learn how to negotiate with your colleagues. And then lastly, and probably the thing that most folks are thinking about is the economic recovery. Again, how do we have resilient communities? And so when you think about, resilient communities, you want stable families and stable home situations. So if we're looking at folks being able to stay in their communities, ownership is one of the best ways to do so. And how do we create housing policy that increases the density so we all have access to the fun things in our communities, and building relationships, but also access to open space? And how does this policy impact all things in our lives, from health equity to environmental justice, and of course, economic recovery and economic development, and community development. And so for me, like choosing the committees I was on, housing, human services, and veterans, is like where you are, where you're living. And then transportation, how do you get there? How do you get home? How do you get to work? And then of course, economic and community development is like, how do you afford to do all the things that we need to do as a community, as a family, as an individual? And, being the fact that I have not a unique experience like so many of my peers. I live in my mother's basement. I say that all the time. I live in my mama's basement. And it was something that made it very hopeful for our intergenerational conversation around what does, her future look like, and what does my future look like in terms of, oh, she wanted me to, help refinance her home and be an owner of their home. I'm like, wait, I feel like there should be like balloons and celebration. And it was just another day. Like, hey, and I had the privilege of being a part of that process in my family, but I know that building intergenerational wealth and those opportunities is not afforded to everyone. So how do we have these conversations on a more regular basis? How do we make sure that communities are connecting to the resources that you build, literally build in our community, and making sure that we have transformation in that way. So I'm always full of hope, even when it feels very dreary, because I need to come back the next day and keep pushing and keep pushing. We didn't get everything done, and I'm not one who likes to pat myself on the back just because I walked in the door. No, because there's always a perspective. No, there's always someone who didn't get heard, and I want to make sure that I'm at least listening moving forward, especially voices who have been outside of the conversation for so very long. I mean, it's really interesting how some of the powerful elite, like wealth owners in the legislature, complain like, you're not hearing all voices, but we've only heard your voices for generations. So you can sit, write your little opus, and we'll talk about policy that is more inclusive moving forward. And perhaps, I'll temper my excitement and my energy in the future. However, right now it's all about bringing the voices to the table and expanding that conversation.
I gotta be honest, Representative. I hope you never temper your excitement. Keep it going. That energy is crucial. I'd also note that, one, you deserved balloons for sure. There should have been balloons or something there, without a doubt. So another question. That leads me into a lot of different questions and a lot of different things. But so there's a lot of different directions we can go from this. But I first want to kind of get into what happened last year. We saw a lot of different housing bills get through. A lot of ones didn't quite get through, unfortunately. And both on from a perspective of rental as also home ownership. So I want to kind of get into some of the details there. I know, for example, Representative, a lot of things that you were supporting and that you were even co-sponsors on, or that you were a co-sponsor on, was a lot of the tenant protection stuff, such as HB 1236, and 1277, and 1277 I think just got signed yesterday, if I remember correctly. I think also 1260 or 36 also did. I don't know. I wanted to open up the floor for you to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the just cause eviction bill and about the document recording fee. And Senator, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about particularly about 5160 as well, which you also co-sponsored, and obviously 5287, which is something, close to our heart as well as MFTE. So, Representative, did you want to?
Yeah. So being on the Housing and Human Services Veterans Committee opened my eyes to a lot of policy that I had not been directly involved in, but impacts all of our work. I mean, the intersectionality of all these systems that play with each other. And just cause eviction, the tenant protections that came out of that bill, Representative Macri had been working on this for years and years and years and years. And if there was ever a time to talk about protecting tenants, it is the pandemic with the eviction moratorium. But we also recognize that a lot of folks didn't understand that eviction moratorium does not mean rent moratorium. And so you have to come together where you have landlords who have done a yeoman's job to, follow the law and allow folks to remain housed and ensure that the tenants are, complying with their obligations. But we also have relief. And so for me, being a part of that historic legislation, it's kind of selfish to the 30th district because the Federal Way area has tenant protections with their just cause and actually has more progressive points in its ordinance than what we have in the state legislation. So for me, I wanted to make sure that we protected what our voters had in the 30th district in ensuring tenant protections. And when we have 49% renters in the 30th district, when we have more renters than we have owners in our communities, we have to figure out how do we keep stable communities. I mean, when rents go up way faster than mortgage does, I mean, and folks are having a hard time, converting over from being a tenant to a homeowner, we've got to, stabilize communities so they can build the wealth, so they can purchase the home at some point, that they can purchase the condos, that they can move on with their wealth generation in their future. For me, this was one of the most important, significant ways to stabilize community, and the disproportionate impact on communities of color in terms of evictions. And when folks think about evictions, I'm not just talking about the unlawful detainers that you go into the court system. This is when the landowner, the landlord says, we just don't want to renew your lease, and gives you 20 days when you've been living there for 20 years. And for me and my family, we've been landlords for most of my life. And my mom's property is in a state where we have just cause eviction, and we've been just fine. And so I think this is something where we have to let folks who are worried about their financial stability as a landlord be taken care of. And Senator Doss will talk about 5160 as a way of rescuing the landlords and finding a pathway forward for both the tenants and the landlords to resolve the issues around rental payments and folks who haven't been accessing resources. But at the end of the day, community is where you are and where you live. And if we don't take care of that most important asset right there, whether you are a renter or a landlord, then we have ultimate chaos and health outcomes around the pandemic. Making sure that you have an economic recovery that is just for everyone and inclusive. If you are not sure where you're living, how do you focus on rebuilding our communities post this crisis? So for me, that focus was just pivotal. And then having 1277 as a permanent way to help tenants through that, important time in their life of, needing that assistance and having a permanent fund to address those issues. Housing policy is complex, and I believe that we have to keep chipping away at the things that erodes communities. And the way we've been doing it and the way we did it this year really sets us on the right path forward for the whole community.
Senator?
I have a lot to say. Jamila nailed it so many times. You're incredible. You do not I mean, I'm in awe of you, Jamila. Like you like, it's like you've been in the legislature for like 30 years. You're amazing.
I learned it by watching you. I bring you back to the 80s.
No, girl, you are amazing, amazing. So I'm just honored to know you. So the first thing I'll say is I've been a mortgage broker and been in the mortgage industry for 16 years. It was always my my passion to help first-time home buyers because I saw it as a pathway out of poverty. I saw it as a pathway into the middle class. My first house I bought at 26. I made 60 grand. My second house I bought, I made, $200,000. And so like, I very quickly saw how by doing nothing, I mean, you're literally living there. Like it's unearned income and privilege, right? I mean, yes, we did, minor fix ups and whatever, but what I realized very young was that this is the pathway, right? And so I focused my career on helping the first time home buyers because nobody else does that. Mortgage brokers go after, the $1 million client. And sometimes I would work with clients literally for 2 or 3 years, fixing their credit, giving them advice about, what bills to pay off and, all of that stuff because it was so important to me. And so it's been amazing to be in the legislature and, continue that advocacy in a different way. The just cause eviction thing, I'm just going to let you all know, the 42 of you are on this call. I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why in the what, the landlords give I do not understand. I would use every bad word. I do not understand why we are fighting till 2021 to just tell people why they're being evicted. I do not understand it. And I thank Representative Macri for working this hard for this many years and all of the advocates. I literally don't understand it. We're not saying don't evict someone if they have a criminal thing or if they have drugs or like anything bad. We're just saying like when you kick someone out, like Jamila said, someone's been living there for 20 years, just tell them. Like, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it literally infuriates me. And I will tell you that electing people like me and Jamila and the many others that look like us and have lived experience is the reason why we're able to pass these bills this year. I told my colleagues on countless occasions that there's a lot of important things that we're going to do. And Jamila shared the 4 priorities, and both caucuses had those: police accountability, economic recovery, COVID relief, and the environment, and racial justice. And so that's really the 5 buckets of all the bills that we passed for the most part. And I will say that one of the things that I said to my colleagues as someone who's been in the housing profession for, almost 2 decades, I said, I believe one of the most important things is to keep people housed because we know what happened in 2008. They cut everything. It was a nightmare and we're still recovering from that. And so this year, I'm sure y'all noticed, I think it was either 57 or 59.2. I know the 0.2 part, billion with the B dollar budget. And that is nothing to shake a stick at. That is investments in people. That is investments in communities of color. That is investments in mental health. That is investments in all the things that got cut in 2008. And I will tell you, every legislator that was around then knows that that was not the right thing to do. And I do believe if Rep. Taylor, Senator Doss, I believe if a lot of us had been there in 2008, we would have said, we're not doing that. But here nor there, hindsight is literally 2020. We learned a lot in 2020. And one of the big things was we can't cut services for the people who need them most and give tax breaks to the rich. Trickle down economics doesn't effing work. And so I am fired up if you can't tell. So I am just so grateful that we passed Just Cause. I'm so grateful that we passed Senator Cruder's bill to, give people legal action. I mean, that's the problem. When you're poor, you can't afford an attorney. I mean, I just got this young woman whose house burnt down in my district. She's in high school. Her parents are she's Vietnamese. Parents don't speak any English. Got scammed, put $1,800 deposit down on a new place after their house burnt down, and it was a scam. Okay, this is the kind of stuff that is unacceptable. and there should be recourse for this family. And there's hundreds of thousands of stories of people getting scammed and, all kinds of things. So I'm so grateful for Rep Taylor's class of, badass Shiro warriors that showed up and said, no, not on our watch. And they were loud about it. Because I will tell you, a few years ago, I made some comments about my legislative colleagues, which you might remember. And everybody was like, what is she talking about? And everyone's like, oh, she's talking about systemic racism. Oh, got it. And so having people like Rep Taylor have my back and I have hers, it made a world of difference. And the bills that we pass this year are going to keep people housed. And if we keep people housed, we can recover. The minute someone experiences, and I don't have to tell y'all, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the minute they become housed, I mean, not only is it horrible for their mental health and everything else, but it will financially cost the state way more money than just keeping them housed in the first place. And Rep Taylor, thank you for being there. Thank you for working so hard.
Well, thank you for your mentorship. I mean, I think, we have a love fest here. Of course we do. But I also want to acknowledge that we've worked across the aisle because on, some of our bills, we did have bipartisan support. So when people are talking about the future of our economy, the future of our community, we do have to talk about making sure we keep roofs over the heads of our communities. And of course, when you're talking about all the other systems that are at play, we differ on some of the strategies, but when we are able to have meaningful conversations and we're able to really reconnect with community voice on it, I think we have come up with better solutions at the end of the day. And so I saw that happen constantly in the housing committee, where we were ultimately focused on how we could work with our Republican colleagues on a daily basis to come up with solutions. Obviously, there are some things that we just, did not agree with. And then when we heard testimony, I forgot, but did not forget that racism has dog whistles. and that there are some folks who were not part of that conversation, and they did not have the support of the Republican colleagues who I know I had been in conversation with. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and perhaps we can change the hearts and minds of more people moving forward. But at the end of the day, those conversations are happening, and that we are building better policy when we're really connecting on that level.
I want to add one thing to the bipartisanship, because I've never, I've only been here for 2 sessions before this one. It was incredible. Things like the working family tax credit, which have never passed before. And then all of a sudden, the Republicans realize that, oh my gosh, this is going to help people in their communities. And majority of the Republicans voted for it. My MFTE bill, I mean, only 5 senators voted no, 5 out of 49. I mean, that's bipartisanship as heck. I mean, that was incredible. And once people start to realize, and I just feel like, I don't know, there's some sort of sea shift. I mean, I passed a bill to ban plastic bags. I had Republicans vote for it. This year, I banned styrofoam and I had Republicans vote for it. So even on the environment, some of them are showing up, and it's kind of fun to watch, because if you really think about some of the policies that we, I'm not going to assume everyone on this call is as strong of a Democrat as I am, but I know Jamila and I are, at least, so I can talk about that. The Democratic principles, I think I'm seeing a difference this year. The bipartisanship was incredible. Now, mind you, like the Just Cause bill, I don't think that was bipartisan. Patty's bill was not bipartisan. Climate commitment, not bipartisan. But I want to celebrate where we did have bipartisanship, because that's progress to me. That's progress. So I'm just, it was an incredible session in every way. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I do want to come back to one of the things that that I think you both touched on, talking about the budget in particular. Obviously, this year's budget was, at least from my perspective, pretty darn good. We were pretty supportive of it. Certainly, $175 million in the housing, or for the Housing Trust Fund, which is fantastic, a great investment that hopefully we can capitalize on and continue to grow. But another thing that I did want to point to was something else that Habitat had strongly supported actually this year, and that was included in the operating budget, was the proviso around a study to, or and hopefully more accurately, a plan to come up with actual steps to address the racial homeownership gap, which I believe both of you mentioned at one point, or at least alluded to. I'm curious to know certainly the plan hopefully is to come up with some concrete solutions out of that we can follow up on. My question is, what are some of the things that you perhaps want to see come out of that and want to see as a result of those conversations that are supposed to be happening darn soon?
I mean, I believe that is a proviso that was put forth by my seatmate, Representative Johnson. And as a person who is the child of a Black historian, we've seen how the gains that are made by other communities in intergenerational wealth have been either eroded or just not available to members of the Black community. And so in terms of, addressing the racial disparity, it's really around, for me, the economic development and making sure that there's inclusion and addressing anti-Blackness in so many aspects. I mean, we can say we could be anti-racist, but I think one of the most important salient areas is that we have to be also specifically making sure that our policies are not anti-Black, because when we had the 2008 recession hit, the gains that many Black folks had made were just wiped out because of the predatory lending. When you're talking about redlining, and when you're talking about access to opportunities that may look different than other folks. Like when we're talking about how folks can't access traditional systems of loans for businesses, and they have to go outside the system. When you have incomplete erosion of communities because of our racist policing practices that impacts communities. These are all things that affect our ability to participate in our economic fabric. And then of course, show that economic participation by home ownership or the entrepreneurship and other things. I mean, like, that brain drain has generational challenges, and to undo that, it takes not only a conversation around the racial disparity around home ownership, but all the systems that lead into those decision-making points. And that work is constant. So when I go into spaces, I don't just talk about policing bills, or I don't just talk about criminal justice reform. I talk about economic justice. And if you don't have economic justice, then certainly we will have this caste system that will remain as it is right now. And so I see Habitat for Humanity. I'll get my words right today. I'm just excited to be here. When I see organizations like that really going to the heart of economic justice, and doing it in an inclusive way, I see transformation, not just for the family, but for communities. And I feel like your footprint needs to be much larger than it is. So how do we make that happen?
And I think building on that, and turning to you, Senator, one of the things that you were actually the prime sponsor of, being 5010, Senate Bill 5010, addressing the use of credit scores for insurance coverage, which unfortunately didn't pass, but luckily enough, the insurance commissioner basically just did it himself. I mean, I guess I kind of want to point to that and ask, what are the things that we still have left to do? There are plenty still to do. Where do you see us going from here?
There's so much left to do. I mean, we had a great session. Hopefully we continue to have This was the most diverse legislature in the history of Washington State. Okay. One other piece of diversity that I want to bring up that was instrumental in a lot of change. We elected someone who was formerly incarcerated.
Absolutely.
There is no known person that's formerly incarcerated in the country that I know of that's other than Representative Tara Simmons. And she's a dear friend of mine, so I will give that disclaimer. I love her as much as I love Jamila and a lot of others. But, having somebody at the table like Tara, that kind of lived experience. We've been legislating for folks who are incarcerated, folks who are about to be incarcerated, and formerly incarcerated people forever. And to have somebody that's like, hey, this is actually what it's like. It's like saying, Jamila says, this is what it's like to have Black skin. And this is what I can say, this is what it's like to be a woman of color and an immigrant and someone who's been through a foreclosure and, all of the things that are bad things that have happened to me as a survivor, as a Me Too survivor, more times than I can count. These kinds of lived experience are what I believe we're missing. And I'm not saying that my colleagues don't have those things, the ones that were there before I came or Jamila came, but maybe they weren't as vocal about them, right? Because, after I shared my Me Too experience for what happened when I was 4 and 8 and 13 years old, many legislators came to me and told me their stories, and it's heartbreaking, it's heartbreaking. But I do say that there's so much left to be done. And so I'm so happy to be part of team 2022 legislators, right? Like it's going to be a great year coming up next year, and it'll be quick, Jamila. So I'll give you some tips on how to navigate that. However, I'm just so hopeful. Like, it makes me verklempt, emotional to think about how much we've done and how much we can do with people like us at the table. And we have been educating our colleagues. And like Jamila said, there's plenty of people that have been there for a long time and they haven't allowed the voices at the table. And now we are doing that. I don't just represent the 47th district. Do y'all know I represent all immigrants, all Indian people, all Pakistani people, all Sikh people? They all call me, right? Because they trust me and they know I can help. And of course, we do whatever we can. My LA is also, she's a refugee from China. And so, like between the two of us, our hearts are so big for, people like us. And so there's so much more to be done. And I'm really excited to have this team. And I think we proved to ourselves, like literally, if we can do remote session, we can literally do anything. And I'm just really excited about what we have left to do. And Ryan, this session was so crazy busy. I was so laser focused on the 6 bills that I passed. I didn't know about this budget proviso, and I'm really excited about it because one of the things that I want to do, which I haven't even called you about yet, because I'm actually on vacation. So I'm trying to take some time to recharge, but these types of conversations are so important to me that I'm taking the time. But one of the things is I realized when we were revamping MFTE, in about December, I realized I was asking the wrong question. The question I asked was, how do we fix MFTE? The question I should have asked, and I am making up for that because I'm doing it now, is how do we solve the housing crisis? My goal is to bring 100 housing advocates together from all spectrums of the housing, including, formerly people who've been formerly, houseless, experiencing houselessness, or people who are currently housed, being are unhoused, and, people like you, Ryan, and Jamila, and people that have, there's about 5 or 6 legislators that really care about housing solutions. Mindy, you're definitely on my list. And so I really want to bring about 100 people together. And Ryan, I am taking advice on who should be there, and ask a different question, because my issue with Olympia is I'm a big picture thinker and I'm an innovative, creative problem solver. And the problem with Olympia, well, there's many, but one of my biggest issues is that we try to solve problems in silos. These problems were not created in silos, okay? Someone who is incarcerated probably has untreated trauma, poverty, like abuse, like let's name 75 things that, that ends up someone, in prison, right? And someone who's houseless, probably has all those same kind of traumas. They just manifest in a different way. So my big thing is we cannot solve these problems in silos. So I want to get a very diverse group of people together to solve the problem. And then once we figure out what the solution or solutions, I believe there's going to be multitude solutions, then we can create bills to address those solutions. The issue is that we start with the bill and then we try to, we do it backwards. And I'm slightly dyslexic, so I do things backwards from what regular people do because I'm slightly dyslexic. So, I can't wait. Ryan, you're on my to-do list to call. So just know your Habitat is big on my list. And I'll be asking you and Mindy and Jamila and some others, if it's 200 people, if it's 50, if it's 40, like let's get the right voices in the room and let's actually figure out how to create laws to help.
Absolutely. We definitely appreciate that. And I will say that I would have thought you would have been over the 100+ person meetings after MFTE and those whole discussions, but I'm glad to see that you're continuing on with that.
That was the tip of the iceberg. I love that stuff. I mean, and Ryan, Jason Guthier, who works with y'all in Tacoma, he told me, he said in December, he said real lobbyists that have been in Olympia for a really long time said to him in December, there's no way they're going to pass an MFTE bill this year. And guess what? We did.
Absolutely. For sure. I remember getting the same texts from Jason as well. And Jason, for those on the call, Jason is the Government Affairs Director for Habitat Tacoma, Pierce County, who's a great partner of ours as well, who we work with frequently also, and somebody I happen to work with frequently as well. Another thing I did as we're kind of wrapping up, I did want to first off, acknowledge and recognize, I believe both Representative Taylor and you, Senator Doss, have mentioned your legislative aides. And as I will say, as a lobbyist, though I don't usually like to put myself in those terms, legislative aides are crucial. And it is literally the reason why things get done. Quite honestly, it is the
100%.
Oh, for sure. And Chio and Natalie, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, and everybody on those teams are really the reason why things get done. The reason why this happened, the reason why anything happens. So I just want to kind of make a quick shout out. We do try not to pester them too much, like you were saying earlier, but it certainly happens on occasion. I also, and then kind of as we're finishing up, I just want to kind of ask a final question to both of you of kind of as like wrap up thoughts, and then also kind of alluding to something that you had asked or that you had mentioned, Senator, what, if you had a magic wand, if you had a magic wand, what would you fix when it comes to housing? Like what's like the one thing that if you could just like, I like to call it the magic wand question, or, you have one wish from a genie. What's the one thing that you would ask to try and fix and solve? And kind of as we're wrapping up here.
I have two answers to that. The first is that I don't know. If we knew, I hope that we would have done it already. And that's really why I'm going into this brainstorming session with an open mind. I am an expert in the things that I'm an expert in, but there's a lot of things I don't know. And so I really, really look forward to diving in deep with people who live, eat, sleep, breathe that question. I know what it's like as a mortgage broker, right? I've been doing that for 16 years, but I can't begin to, like the bills that Nicole Macri, Rep Macri and Senator Couture put forth. I mean, I can't begin to, they solve some big problems and I'm grateful. One of the things I love about the legislature is There's 49 senators and we all have different areas of expertise. We all come from different backgrounds. And so the bills that we bring, you know, because it takes a lot to pass the bill. So you have to be real passionate about it. And so I just like, it makes the world go round that Jamila focuses on what Jamila focuses on and I focus on what I focus on. Was Jamila excited that I banned styrofoam? Yes. Did she vote yes? Yes. Is she gonna put her heart and soul into that bill? Probably not. But, you know, the bills that she put her heart and soul into, you know, I supported. So it's kind of awesome that way. So the answer is the magic wand is there. I can't wait to access it. I can't wait to wave it around and, you know, do what I'm good at, which is passing bills and introducing legislation. But I do not know the answer. And I hope that if we did know the answer, that we would have done it already, like for reals. I have ideas, but I'm certainly not going to color the brainstorming session with what I think. So that's my first thing. The second thing, and this is why I am passionate about talking about this. It's a big secret in Olympia. No one talks about it. So I am, because that's who I am. We've done a great job of diversifying the legislature. Yes, we have more to do. Absolutely. 1/3 of the Democratic caucus in the House are now people of color, and they have over 50% women. We just achieved 50% women in the Senate this year by appointing June and getting June and then Twana. Now we're 50%. We only have 8 people of color in the Senate out of 28. So we got a lot of work to do. And you know, there's no people of color on the House side, in the Senate side in the Republican Party. So we got a lot of work to do there. Where I see a bigger difference now that I feel like that wheel is turning, and I mentioned this earlier about the lobbyists, and the reason why I bring up the lobbyists is some of you don't know, and it's all public record, so you can look it up. Some of these lobbyists make $100,000 a month. You heard that right, a month. Some make more. Yeah, I mean, the folks that work for organizations like Ryan, I'm sure don't make $100,000 a month. But some of them do. And what that means is their entire job is to kill progress. And this year I came up with a new mantra. You want an exemption? I am begging you for progress. And I went up against the dairy industry and won, and, you know, worked with the builders to come up with a good solution. I went against the styrofoam industry and won. And the reason is because there's more people like me and Jamila there to say, no, we don't really care about styrofoam. No, we don't care about plastics. No, we don't care about chemicals. And the developers are going to work with us and build actual affordable housing if we're going to give them a tax credit, right? So that's the difference. So what I'm trying to do in my own little way is talk with the lobbyists that I know that look the exact opposite of me, and ask them to hire their next person to be a woman or a person of color. So that's how that changes. And that the lobbyists that make the $100,000 a year, $100,000 a month, you know, and some of them make $37,000 a month, but I've never made $37,000 in a month. So I'm just saying, like, that is what needs to change. And the other thing that shocks me is these are state level lobbyists. Imagine what the federal level lobbyists are. So if you want to know why things are the way they are, first, we didn't have enough people that look like me and Jamila at the table, period. Second is these lobbyists make so much money and their entire job is to kill bills. And that is ending. And so one of my missions, I have many missions, you'll know, but one of them is to diversify and, you know, make sure there's more women. And I'll just share this last quick story. 2 years ago, there was a bill, the climate commitment, what became the Climate Commitment Act, and it was all the oil lobbyists. And I looked out into the audience and I was so shocked. And I like lifted up my camera and I took a picture. And Senator Marco Elias, who's one of my dearest friends, leans over, and he's been in the legislature for like 12 years. Okay, so remember, he's the frog in the water, right? He leans over and he goes, "What'd you just take a picture of?" And I just said, "Look." And he's like, he looks, he's like, "What did you take a picture of?" I'm like, "Look, here is a bill that affects communities of color." There were 100 lobbyists in the room. 75 were white men, okay? 25 were women. and there was one person of color. That is what's broken, and I am determined to fix it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beautiful thing about an increased amount of diversity in the legislature is that there's also a diversity of opinions and strategies. Like, of the Black Members Caucus, we have 9 members, on both 8 in the House and 1 in the Senate, and we have a diversity of thought and ideas and lived experiences. Like, none of us have been billionaires like Bill Gates, but I don't think any of you all have either. But we also, have folks who have not lived in abject poverty. And so our lived experiences through how community is sharing their experiences. And so for me, it's really about how do I return back to community to hear experiences, to have empathy, to have sympathy as I go through. Because I'm sorry, but I cannot live everyone's experience to be able to legislate. I have my own things in my past that I bring to the table, and I have my own ideology and my ability to have discernment and ability to kind of negotiate. And so that is to me what I think is the important part of the process. The legislation is an incremental process, and even when we do that, folks are frustrated because, for example, when the Blake decision came down that decriminalized simple possession, the legislators were not ready to stay in that stead. They were not ready to keep it decriminalized. However, we were able to come up with a compromise, if you will, that not only provided resources, but a pathway forward to full decriminalization if we are committed and we prioritize communities moving forward. For me, it's about a process. It's about how do we get people in the conversation, because not everyone in the Black community in particular are in agreement around what needs to be done next. And I don't want us to see that we're a monolith in our processes. And so the thing for me is, again, about process. And what I'm finding that at the state legislative level, we may have more agreement than we have disagreement, even amongst bipartisanship. But then you go down to the local level, and that's where things stop, come to a screeching halt. And so all things being local, how do we build more relationship and more effective relationship, legislating relationship and governance relationship with our local leaders, our municipal leaders and our community leaders? If we don't start to build that bridge, then even the policies that we are putting forth at the statewide level can be undone or undermined in their implementation. And that's the key thing. Is like when we're talking about racial equity, when we're talking about economic recovery, we're talking about climate justice. Those are all things that can be undermined when you start talking about implementation, or folks simply just like, we refuse, we don't want your money. And then they wonder why they are falling further and further behind. And then they, some of them, I'm not saying all local leaders, but some local leaders, they're more enamored by their own power and structure that they have than they are about actually preserving their way of life. And I don't even want to say their way of life as if it is not inclusive, because I'm talking about the rural way of life. I'm talking about the suburban way of life that a lot of folks are trying to access and have a different a viewpoint in the world. I mean, because not everybody wants to live in the inner city. Not everybody wants to live in a high-rise tower. Some folks do want to live in communities that look very much like mine, and that's the community that I grew up in. I grew up in smaller towns and rural areas and suburban areas, and that's the thing, is like we all have different perspectives. And when you look at the makeup of the Black Members Caucus, most of us are outside of the city center core. And so when we are talking about housing policy, we're hoping and seeing the effect of how Habitat for Humanity comes to the table, and how you're really transformational in our communities and really essential in helping us to develop that housing policy moving forward. And that housing policy that goes from being a renter to a homeowner.
Absolutely.
Okay, but what does that look like? And so that's what we're looking for, and we want to walk with you in that journey. And it's the journey that is important, and we will transform communities together.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for joining us and being a part of this. I do want to quickly note, thank you very much for your question, Chris. I saw that it came through. I just wish I had enough time to be able to ask it, because honestly, I feel very much the same. I feel like that's something we're going to need to be tackling in the next coming years. And I honestly have a solid list of about 6 or 7 more questions for each of you that I could have had the opportunity to ask, that I was ready to, but we just didn't have enough time. So thank you again so much to both of you for being a part of this. And thank you for all of the work you do, not only for your districts, but for the entire state of Washington. So thank you. A couple of quick final pitches, as everyone I'm sure is logging off, is first off, I want to encourage you, if these are the kind of things you're interested in and you want to get involved in Habitat's work on advocacy work and the things that we do, please make sure to send a text to SKC. Send SKC to 52886. You can sign up there to join our advocacy alerts, and we'll send you texts. We don't do it all the time, I promise you. But 52886, you'll want to send SKC to 52886. Another thing is Habitat Seattle is hosting our Beyond the Build luncheon, which is going to be fantastic. Our keynote speaker is a gentleman by the name of Matthew Desmond, who's the author of the book Evicted, which won a number of awards. It's an amazing book. I've read it. I highly encourage others to read it as well. You can go to habitatlunch.org and sign up. It is free to attend, though obviously we'll probably ask you for a contribution once you're there, but that's always the way that works, right? And then also I want to highly encourage everyone to join HDC for other Affordable Housing Week events. They're incredibly important. This entire week is awesome, and we're going to do all kinds of fun stuff. So please, there's the link in the chat. It's housingconsortium.org/affordable-housing-week. Please make sure that you go to that, sign up, attend some of this other stuff as well. Thank you so much again to both of our amazing legislators that joined us today. Thank you, all of you, to the audience for being here. I hope you had a wonderful day, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ryan. Great conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on your vacation. Senator, I didn't know
My
you were on
honor.
vacation.
My honor.
Bye.
Bye,
I'm
everyone.
going in June, so.